whether you're ready or not. And speaking of that, I was just talking to Brother Dan. I was like, so, because he's a retired educator, I was like, so is it an indicator that you're ready to retire when that day comes back that you got to go back to work and you really don't really want to go? And that's really where I'm at right now, because tomorrow we've had a wonderful 2 weeks. It's felt like 3 because we had 3 full weekends off, and we got to go back to school tomorrow. I'm just like, I'm not really ready. Don't really want to. And that ice stays north of I-40 every time. Yeah. And then we're like, you better not bring ice tomorrow when we don't have kids. We need it on Wednesday when the kids are supposed to come back, right? I know that's awful, but you know. Friday. That's one to be, why on the weekend, right? But no, like Andrew can tell you, I've got it made. I do enjoy what I do, but I'm getting a little closer. I'm getting that itch. I don't know what I would do, but I'm getting that itch. Anyway, well, all right, we are back in the Gospel of John. It's hard to believe. It's been a year since we'd studied this. I was thinking about it. Yeah, 2025. What, the year has flown by from 2024. All right, so I want to do a little recap because it has been a year since we discussed our Gospel of John. So we'll see how many have a great memory and recollection. All right, so a little recap. First lesson was John the Apostle, and we discussed 3 of his main characteristics that we need to try to emulate in our own Christian walk. Can anybody remember one of those 3? I think I heard it. Intolerable, right? Intolerable, that's one. We all should be dependable. That was number 2. And then being bold and courageous, right? So those are the main 3. He's intolerant, he was dependable, and he was courageous. All right, and then the second lesson on the Word becomes flesh, that was in John's way helping us to understand the deity of Christ. Okay? Third lesson, the new birth. This is when Jesus was having his time with Nicodemus, the Pharisee. What did we see in that relationship? I'm getting a little closer. Maybe y'all kind of remember a little bit. What did we see in that relationship over the conversation, what was going on, what Jesus was teaching Nicodemus? What did we see kind of transpire there?
We saw that Nicodemus had a beginning misunderstanding, wondering about a physical world as opposed to a spiritual world.
Right, and throughout the book of John, we're going to see that in context often of let's just say that generation, everything was visible, physical, right? They could not understand this thing. What's this spirit that he's talking about? You know, we are flesh. What is this spirit that Christ keeps teaching us or wanting us to understand? And Nicodemus was starting to learn that, and Jesus definitely spent that time, and mainly it was about being born of water and spirit. Right, that born of water and spirit in order to enter the kingdom of heaven, or kingdom of God. All right, and then our last lesson was Jesus at Jacob's well, and who was he sitting with and teaching at the well? The Samaritan woman. All right, there we go, the Samaritan woman, and this was more than anything was about the proper way to worship. You don't have to go to that mountain to worship anymore, right? The worship is in spirit and truth. And there was that spirit again, and water. We got to have water, right? We have to have water to stay hydrated. They just didn't quite understand what's the meaning of this water and the spirit. And there again, Christ taught that. And then we saw how she just was lit a fire, and she goes throughout telling everyone about what she had just witnessed. All right, so that brings us to this week. This study, we're going to be in John chapter 6. John chapter 6, where Jesus feeds the multitude. And here in John's account, it's very direct, not as much we can pull from it. I'm going to follow the text a whole lot more than I have been, because I want to make sure I don't leave anything out, because it's some important information. But it's important that I want to tell myself here. What's the fun fact about this topic of Jesus feeding the multitude, feeding the thousands? What's the fun Bible fact with that one? Is it just told in John? It's the one miracle in all four Gospels. Told in all four Gospels. It's the one miracle, him feeding the multitude, or the 5,000 as it's referred to as well. All right, so a little more backstory on this, kind of set the scene to get us here. I'm going to read from this introduction. So John ended his biography of Jesus by saying, "And there are also many other things that Jesus did, which if they were written one by one, I suppose that even the world itself could not contain the books that would be written." And that's in John chapter 21, verse 25, that John made that statement. So with these words, John is emphasizing just the superiority, the greatness of Jesus, our Savior. Because it was not possible for him to discuss all that Jesus did while he was on earth. So think about it, the gospel, if all the writers of the New Testament were able to write every little thing that they saw. You know, the book would be just too big, too big. No, I don't see. Dana Laney, someone say she couldn't even read that book in a year. Amber says she read over 200-something books in 2024. Wow. I'm just trying to get through two, But, so this event, one of these events was Jesus' miraculous feeding of the 5,000 that we're going to study in chapter 6, verses 1 through 14. All right. And then the second part of this is the miracle occurred shortly after the death of John the Baptist. So that's important to know going into the text that we're going to read. So after learning of the death, Jesus, who was not doubtful, sorrowful because of it, he attempted to retreat with his disciples across the Sea of Galilee. And it was actually stated in Mark 6. All right, Mark 6, let me go to that one, verse 31. Let's see Mark's account here in this one. And in verse 30, the apostles gathered to Jesus and told him all things, both what they had done and what they had taught. And he said to them, "Come aside by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while." So that's important in a question we're going to have here at the end of the lesson. And let's go back to what he just said in verse 30 that Mark did. The apostles gathered to Jesus and told him all things, both what they had done and what they had taught. So it's important to know before this miracle of feeding the 5,000, what did Jesus do? What did he have the disciples do? He sent them out. He sent all 12 out by twos, right? So they are now on their mission. They are going out preaching and teaching what Christ has, what they've learned from him. So they've been going out spreading the word, spreading the truth, okay? At this point, they've come back together before Jesus feeds this multitude. So because of his popularity at this point in his ministry, the multitude saw them departing and they followed. That was in Mark 6, verse 33. And then they arrived at their destination near Bethsaida. We get that from the account in Luke 9, verse 10. They found that the crowd preceded them. Therefore Jesus saw a great multitude and was moved with compassion for them, because they were like sheep not having a shepherd. So he began to teach them many things. That's in Mark's account, also 6, verse 34. All right, and then there's one in Matthew. Let's see. Jesus, in his demonstration of his power, provided the food to the crowd of about 5,000 men. And then it says, besides women and children. So, the count was 5,000 men. Each man could have had a wife, could have had then the child, the children that may have been with them. We don't know the exact number that were there, but we could guess definitely much more than 5,000, right? So just have that picture in your mind. All right, so that kind of gets us led up to going into these verses. Let's see. All right, so in John chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. Again, this is John's account. After these things, Jesus went over the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. Now, these things, that goes back to a couple things I just mentioned in reading in Mark, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, knowing of John the Baptist's death, okay? And then Jesus, after sending them out, they were telling them all the things that they had done or had witnessed, the Spirit working through them, through the people that they were reaching and going out to reach and teach. So those are these things that John is referring to in verse 1. And then verse 2, then a great multitude followed them because they saw his signs, which he performed on those who were diseased. And Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat with his disciples. Now the Passover, a feast of the Jews, was near. So this is important just because of the Passover. And when we read about when he has them sit in the grass, we know it's the springtime. We're getting a little more context there on the time of year that this is happening. So we have the setting. Let's look a little bit more into that. So most of Jesus' ministry occurred around the Sea of Galilee. That body of water, we also find out in the New Testament in John chapter 21, Luke chapter 5, or John 21 is also called the Sea of Tiberias. And then in Luke, it's called the Lake of Gennesaret. Is that correct? Gennesaret, did I say that right? So it's 13 miles long, 7 miles wide in its extremities. So it's not surprising that the multitude of Jesus' disciples were what? Fishermen, right? So they knew that was their livelihood. And the people that they were going to predominantly, lived off of that sea, right? They lived off that sea. But on this certain occasion, Jesus and his disciples most likely departed from Capernaum and went over the Sea of Galilee to an isolated place, which in John 6:1, it states, he went over the Sea of Galilee and also the Sea of Tiberias. In so doing, he left the jurisdiction of Herod, who what? He's the one that killed John the Baptist, and of course, also was what? After Jesus. Right, so it's important to understand that, the time frame here. And of course, not being Jesus' time yet, he knew they needed to get away from that area, go somewhere else, because his work wasn't done. So it's Jesus' intention to escape, but it wasn't successful because of this multitude. And why did he need to escape? Well, let's look at, let's see, what verse did I have written there? I think also Mark gives us a better account. Let me find it. Well, I thought I had it written down. Let me see if it's in Mark 6. 6 verse 33. No, that's not the one. What I'm looking for is where he said that he and the disciples to come and rest. They were going there to rest because what had the disciples been doing? They had been out on their mission trip, right? They had been out. I'm not sure the number of days, how long they had been, how much area they had covered, but he knew they were tired. And so something we're going to learn from this experience is, why is there importance to rest?
6:31.
Thank you. You want to read that for me? So we got it from the Word.
And he said to them, come aside by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while. For there were many coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat.
Rest and eat. Two things that like we learned last week, that we have to have, right? We have to have that for our bodies to function, for our minds to function properly. If we're not healthy in our body, our spirit we're not going to be as giving of our spirit, okay? So that's where we have that battle with our internal flesh from there. So Jesus wanted them to rest so they could recuperate, right? But all of a sudden, here comes this crowd. They are following them. They're hungry. Are they hungry for food at this point? Why are you following somebody? They want to hear more. They want to hear more of the Word. So they're hungry for the Spirit as well as for the food, the actual food to eat. All right? So let's look at verses 5 through 9 now. 5 through 9. John chapter 6. Then Jesus lifted up his eyes, and seeing a great multitude coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread that these may eat?" But this he said to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may have a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish, but what are they among so many?" So we have 2 different disciples' thoughts on how to handle the situation. And we're going to look at that a little deeper here as we finish the lesson. So, we don't know why Jesus asked Philip. The commentator here in this text says it may be because of the area they were at. It's possibly where Philip was and might know where to go get bread. There's that possibility. But then again, we don't really know. So let's just say that Jesus was testing him. Because we all know what? Jesus already knew the answer. Right? We know that. Jesus already knows. So he asked Philip. And Philip's response is, didn't have enough to buy that much bread. All right. Then Andrew comes up with a response. He presented somewhat of a solution. Here's a young lad with the bread and the fish. Even though it was 5 and 2, at least he has something to offer for Jesus to do something with. All right. So let's keep that in mind. And then let's think about ourselves. How would we have responded, okay, if Jesus had asked us those 2 questions? All right, and here I want to look at the other, let's see. So according to John, the multitude followed Jesus because of the signs. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not the problem. So here, let's see, where do I want to read that one? This commentator states specifically, Philip, however, failed the test miserably. He's calling this a test. Jesus was testing Philip on what he would do and how we're going to feed all these people. And there it is, because he came from the near town Bethsaida. But regardless of that, rather than relying upon the Savior for the solution, he evidently calculated, and there again, it's that mind of being physical. I've got this money. This money is not enough, right? This money is not enough. And then we get to where Andrew answers. He joins in, brought to Jesus the boy who was willing to share his lunch. Andrew's effort could be considered more commendable, right? At least he had hope with what he was willing to offer. All right? So again, what are we willing to offer in situations like this? I know many times I've gone to my boss with, over the years, wanting something, needing something for the program I'm working with, and sometimes there wasn't the money to purchase what was needed. I never, and I was also told I never mind being told no. I thought, well, if I don't ask, I'm not going to get a yes or a no, right? So I'm going to ask if we can provide, what we need, if we have the money to provide what we need for our team, for our program, whatever it is that we are needing the money for. So be thinking about that when we close. All right. Now let's look at 10 through 14. 10 through 14. Oh, wrong. I got it here. Quicker to look here. So in verse 10, then Jesus said, make the people sit down. Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down and number about 5,000. And Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to the disciples, and the disciples to those sitting down, and likewise of the fish, as much as they wanted. So when they were filled, he said to his disciples, gather up the fragments that remain, so that nothing is lost. Therefore they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves, which were left over by those who had eaten. Then those men, when they had seen the sign that Jesus did, said, this is truly the prophet who is to come into the world. So once again, the importance of just miracles was for what? For us to see, for someone to see the power that comes from God. And one thing we've talked about previously, do we actually see physical miracles today? Do we get to touch and cause a miracle to happen today? Do we have that kind of power? No, but what do we see happen from God's work? It's like that. Do we see the wind? No. What do we see from the wind? We see the effects, right? So our spirit, we can't see that spirit, but when that spirit's through us to another, how it affects that individual is how we see the Spirit, how we see God's Spirit working through us. All right? Then we'll look at, not having to read it, but in Deuteronomy, the miracle is called a sign because it was correctly interpreted to signify that God was with him who performed this wonderful act. The confession of the men is significant, for they concluded on the basis of the miracle that Jesus was the one Moses spoke of in the prophecy, the Messiah. And that's from Deuteronomy 15:18, where that prophecy was stated. So when we look at just these short verses here, when we look at these short verses about this miracle, why is it important? We kind of already stated it, but why is it important for us to get rest, to get physical rest? To allow us to do what? Allow us to work, right? Allow us to work for God, work in the kingdom. We need our physical rest in order to be more productive, okay? So there's one reason there behind that. Remember, Jesus wanted them to rest, but they didn't get to rest. What did they get to see in return? The power of God through Jesus, through those miracles. All right, and then, so for us to have physical rest, it strengthens our spirituality, as we see in Mark, as we're in Mark 6:31, where Jesus said, come aside by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while. So Jesus knew they needed to rest. He knows we need that physical rest. Without it, we're not going to be as productive. Okay, so let's keep that in mind for ourselves and how we can reach others. So what differences do we perceive in the attitudes of Philip and Andrew? When you think about what we just talked about, Philip would be considered more maybe skeptical. Again, he was in that mindset of we have this much money. We can't do anything with it, right? We're stuck. I believe, is it this Saturday we're having the men's meeting? Somewhere in that, at the end of the class, probably going to be a discussion of something we can do. What can we do to help? What can we do to assist? What mindset are we bringing to that table of discussion? Okay? So moving forward with it, what mindset are we bringing to the table of discussion? Are we only going to come with a problem? Or are we going to be able to come with maybe there's a situation and we have a solution? Okay, that's the other thing I always learned from one of my mentors, and was to, don't just come with me with a problem, bring me the solution with the problem, and then we're more likely to get it worked out, right? So be thinking of things that that you would like to mention, if there is anything, in that men's meeting next Saturday when we have that time for that discussion. So what can Christians do to be more positive regarding the work of the church? All right, here's your time to answer. Be more like Andrew.
Keep bringing people to Christ.
Bringing through to Christ. Exactly. All right. Somebody else?
Contrast the mindset you're mentioning. One seems to say it can't be done, and the other one doesn't know how it can be done, but he's at least open to the possibility that it
Right.
can be done.
And there's that hope.
He's more like, well, how can we do this? Instead of, we can't do this.
And that's needed as well. That's needed as well. Sometimes we just need someone to ask that question. You know, how? If you can't present it, then at least you understand they see a need. So if we see a need, it's never going to get fixed if it's what? Not brought up, right? So that's something that we can do is if we see a need, if we see a concern, we come up, we at least acknowledge it. And once it's acknowledged, then it can be, the discussion can start. But also try to have a solution. Might not be the right one, but start that, have that idea. Oh, there's one guy I coach with. He is the master of the questions. He questions every scenario to everything that could even possibly happen. Sometimes our Sunday meetings turn into 3 hours because of his thought process. And we just want to say, stick to the plan, you know. But there's just we've learned to appreciate that, and there's been times that you're right, that could happen. So let's look and do it this way. Might not have come up if he hadn't been that person to ask those questions or to bring up those possibilities. And he can definitely bring up the possibilities of this, if that, what if? No. Okay, but it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to bring up things that might be that we see could be different. Do what? Correct. That's correct. Right. Right. Exactly. And what I do like when you look in the other gospel accounts, there's a little more specific of the boy with the food. The boy has the basket of the bread, the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. And then Andrew's the one that notices it first and brings that attention to Jesus. Okay? Exactly. Good point.
Andrew might have been remembering when he converted water to wine. Make something happen.
Mm-hmm. And with that, again, he remembered something to, I believe he can do something with this, with this little bit of bread and fish. And that's what we need to take from that. No matter how small it is, or something that we see, what can come from it? What can come from it with when God's behind it? All right. And one thing, go finish here with, in verses 10 through 14, after he had them sit down, look at with verse 11. Jesus took the loaves, and what did he do next? He gave thanks. So if our Lord and Savior is going to give thanks for something that we know he can do, that's really important for us. And that's really a testament for us to make sure that we're always giving thanks. Always giving thanks. So important for us to have that prayer before we eat. And there's so many times whether I'm either really hungry and I'm ready just to start eating or snacking and jump in front of if it's one of those days where you're got a TV tray in front of the chair watching TV, ball game, whatever, someone will say, have we prayed yet? No? Okay. So, again, somebody, when it's needed, bring it up. And but it's just, again, he points out here by him saying to give thanks. He gave thanks. That is something that we need to make sure we're always doing as well, is giving thanks for what we have. And as we've mentioned in the previous classes, how to give that glory, to God for what we have. And the power of prayer is definitely what we need to do in any of those situations. But to pray give thanks for what we have and for a bounty, for whatever it might be for us to give thanks.
We give thanks before America happens.
Thanks before what?
Before America happens, right? And so often we wait till after the fact when we give thanks. I think we saw us here give thanks before.
That's yeah, very good point. When we recognize it, there's even more important to us, right? Exactly. Can't remember the exact words to it, but that made me think of the way you said that. There's a singer in one of his songs is, I only talk to God when I need something, along that line. And that happens probably often in all of our lives, maybe too often than it needs to. We only go to God in prayer when we know we really, really need something, instead of being in that constant conversation with Him and having that close relationship with Him where we're always talking to Him and in prayer and Him knowing that the Christ is our advocate for many answers and solutions in life. We tend to just wait till that dire moment, and we haven't been giving it our thanks to Him and prayer to Him, laying it all out in prayer like we should. Great comments. Anything else along that line?
If there's any meaning into the verse 12, he commanded them to gather up all the remains so that nothing is lost. The fragments, has that got any spiritual meaning as well? Anywhere you go, you don't leave any fragment or anything that you've not tried to teach someone or convert someone.
I definitely think, I think you're going somewhere with that because, again, there's a point behind everything that's said. Yeah.
And then also the other one is, they were thankful for what they had and didn't think they were going to eat anything, and also don't take for granted what you had and leave, wasted.
Right.
I guess you could say. So anyway.
No, you're exactly right. I appreciate you bringing that up because another point would be along that line, we have to realize that when God's behind it, there's never lacking, right? He's going to provide. He's going to provide what is needed and sometimes even more. And what are we going to do with that, right? I'm glad you brought that, saw that in that, Scott. Thank you. Any other thoughts? All right, a couple other points here from it. I'm going to look at the applications here that he states from it. So although not the focus of the account was Jesus' intention to retreat and isolate, to rest a while, Christians today would do well to learn from this example. Our schedules are frequently filled to the point that we have little time, that we take the time for the meditation and to recuperate. And meditation can be used in many, many different ways. A time to meditate is just how you are thinking and reflecting, and that could be your time of prayer as well. When you meditate on something, it could be thinking about what has happened. It could be helping you get focused on what you need to do. And that's important that we find that time. In one of my health classes that I teach, talking about time management, we point out on a 24-hour clock, the 24-hour day, we always start with, how much did you sleep? When did you go to sleep last night? What time did you wake up? Then we start right there. And then we start the time you wake up. And we just fill in the hour on the rest of the day till you go to sleep again. And I use that to try to show them how much wasted time that we all have. How much wasted time that could be used to do something else. And of course, the majority of teenagers, other than that sleep, and actually more than that sleep, is what? What are they doing? Social media, texting, technology. That is their world. And because the other part of them to take care of their health is it should be recommended 2-hour limit on technology, 1 hour daily of some type of physical activity for their health. So that's 3 hours of that 24-hour span. Technically, it's an 8 to 9 hours of sleep recommended for teenagers, right? We'll always just say 8 hours. Some of them are only getting 4, but they're spending 12 hours on technology. Are they rested? No. Oh, my goodness. Anyone need to take the Lord's Supper? Now's that time to go. So let's use that in our life. How much time, when we consider our day, look at that time frame in hours. It doesn't matter what time I go to sleep. Now, when I say sleep, I'm talking about when I put my head on the pillow. I've learned that I do nap in the recliner, off and on, but I don't count that towards my sleep. But when I put my head on my pillow, whether it's 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, midnight, in 6 hours, I'm awake. I am awake. It drives Andrea nuts, but I do try to tiptoe and not wake her up, because on breaks, she has the time that she wants to wake up. It doesn't matter. 6 hours from the time I put my head on the pillow, I'm waking up. And then hopefully I can be productive the rest of the day. But anyway, I don't know how I got off on that. We're talking about the kids sleeping, but it is important that, hey, we talked about resolution this morning, right? What's that first priority we need? Y'all got to make Chris feel good now. What was the main priority of the sermon this morning? What's the first priority we should all have? Huh? God first. Priority of time with God. Whatever that is for us, right? Time with God. What a way to start the day, right? If you can't do it then, if you don't do it then, find somewhere in your day. Some people like to do it at night. I can't read it. If I want to go to sleep, I'm going to read at night. So I have to read and study something, I got to do it in the morning when I'm fresh. But if I start reading at night, I'm definitely falling asleep. Okay, that's just me. So you got to find your time that works in your schedule. But the key is to make sure you plug that in to that 24-hour clock. Okay. We've kind of already gone over the attitudes of Philip and Andrew. So let's finish with this one. So the example set by Jesus in expressing thanks before feeding the people is one we need to follow, especially true for those who have never experienced great hardship in life. Nevertheless, blessings come from God in James 1:17. As our Savior did, we should express thanks without apology or hesitation for the good things we enjoy. After all, God wants His people to be thankful that we see in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 18. All right. We got so much more out of that than I thought we were. I appreciate that. Appreciate the comments. Looking forward to our next lesson, and our next one is Jesus, the bread of life. We'll continue in John chapter 6, verse 22 through 40. Always talk about food, doesn't he? Always talks about bread. So make sure you eat before you come. I don't want y'all hungry, or at least get you a snack, okay? Get you a snack before you come, so you're not, every time we hear bread, you don't look and try to find something to eat, okay? So let's continue our study in John, and we'll look at it again next week on the bread of life. Appreciate y'all. Happy New Year. And remember that first priority in those New Year's resolutions is that priority with God. Have a great week. Maybe that wintry mix won't be too harsh if it hits.